an aunt is technically our parent's sibling or the spouse of our parent's sibling. Mm-hmm. Whereas an auntie, I think about, and I think others who are thinking about this also really think about aunties as what experts call an alloparent. An alloparent is somebody who is, kind of load-bearing and involved in the raising of a child. And throughout human history, there have always been alloparents. Grandparents, especially grandmothers, are like a really, really major category of this throughout human history. We have relied very heavily on grandmothers for childcare and child rearing, but it's also non-familial people, friends of the family, any human who is kind of choosing, as we were just speaking about, to step in and support the welfare of a child.
I'm Keltie McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello, I feel like I need a trumpet or something because we are kicking off season 6 of the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Yes, you are listening to the podcast. Did I mention that part? I am your host, Keltie McGuire, here with another amazing 12, 15 or so odd episodes that will comprise this season, talking about and helping you make your kids or child-free decision. And today we are kicking off with a very important conversation about being an auntie. Now, I say auntie, you may say auntie, you may say aunt, you may say aunt. My guest and I, we had some conversation about the terminology of this. But specifically today, we're going to be talking about auntie as far as a role that we can take on, whether or not we have a sibling or siblings with children, whether or not our partner, if we're in a relationship, has a sibling or siblings with kids. We can take on this role of auntie if this is something that's important for us and we want to invest in kids in our lives. And this is something that can be especially meaningful and important for those of us who end up deciding not to have kids. So please allow me to introduce you to today's wonderful guest, Lisa Sibbett. Lisa writes the Auntie Bulletin, a weekly newsletter about kinship, chosen family, and community care. A longtime auntie herself, Lisa often focuses on the experiences of people without children who are nevertheless cultivating childful lives. She draws on over 20 years' experience as a teacher, educator, and educational researcher to offer accessible, entertaining advice for building communities where all children, not just our own, can thrive. Lisa Sibbett of the Auntie Bulletin. I am so happy to have you here. And of course, you and I were sort of off to the races. I'm like, I better hit record before you say something really good that I'm going to wish we had. I'm like, don't say anything brilliant that we can have part of this conversation. And I would love, I think perhaps your story of what you're doing with the Auntie Bulletin and your role as auntie will tie nicely into the question I'm going to ask you, which is, I usually ask people, okay, how did you end up either choosing to have kids or choosing to be child-free? I'm going to put a little bit of a different spin on it and say, how did you end up becoming an auntie? And what does this role actually entail?
I love that question. So I've always had lots of kids in my life. I'm one of 6 children. I grew up with tons of kids around. I did a lot of babysitting of my younger siblings and their friends and all the kids in town growing up. So I've sort of always, and then I have much older siblings, so they started having kids when I was a teenager. So I've just sort of always had kids in my life. I was raised by early childhood educators. My mom was an early childhood educator. My grandmother was an early childhood educator. My other grandma was an educator. So it was kind of like natural for me to always be involved in the lives of my friends' kids. And in my early 20s, one of my best friends had a baby and asked me to be the baby's godmother. And that baby is now 17 years old. Wow. It wasn't my early 20s, must have been my late 20s because now I'm 45. Anyway, she's 17. And, once I had a goddaughter, I got much more, concertedly involved in the lives of particularly that family. And then over time, other families as well. And so, and I never wanted kids myself until, I was 37 and suddenly I did want kids. And my partner and I started trying to have a baby and I lost a lot of pregnancies in rapid succession. And so we were trying to figure out, do we want to adopt? Do we want to try IVF? We kind of went through a bunch of different explored a lot of different options, but I was realizing, and my partner also, that we were actually still very much on the fence, and it was really hard to decide. And eventually my partner kind of tipped toward like, I don't want to be a parent. And I kind of had to decide, do I want to fight this, or do I want to acquiesce to my partner's decision? And I think it would have been, he would have come along with me if I had really needed him to, but I didn't want to do it in an environment of sort of like low consent, if that makes sense. I didn't want to coerce him into becoming a parent when he didn't want to. And for a little while there, I was really conflicted. It wasn't like I knew what I wanted. I was just like in this very like, I'm not sure. But the timing of our decision to not have children ended up being quite fortuitous, because it was only about a year before the pandemic hit. And then we had recently moved into co-housing with some really good friends of ours. We were in a bubble with these friends who have small children, and we became very intensively involved in helping to care for those children. And a lot of my loved ones who were having babies during the pandemic, of course, it was just incredibly hard during that time to have a new baby. So I sort of became increasingly grateful that we had not had children during that time. And today I'm really, really grateful that we didn't end up having kids, although that was a really heart-wrenching time. But between living in co-housing, having these kids who have become a really, really daily part of our lives, and then having a lot of other kids who have been part of my life for many years, the auntie role just sort of like, it almost feels like it was always inevitable. Like it was just gonna, that was always what I was going to be doing. And actually, I remember I had this recollection at one point that when I was younger, as a young adult, I always had this sort of hunch that I was going to end up helping to raise other people's children. And I had forgotten about that. And then that sort of like recollection returned to me recently. And, when I say helping to raise other people's children, I say that very loosely because, the parents do 99.9% of the labor, and the aunties are coming in to like provide some alleviation from time to time, add a little bit of capacity, but it's not comparable, the workload and the investment that has to be involved there for a parent. But it still is a really, really profound role that I'm super grateful to have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. I think you mentioned you're 45 now, had you said?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this is all happened in like a relatively short period of time,
Yeah.
one could say. And yet at the same time, I can see that you've really thought about and sort of, when I say created a narrative, I don't mean that in the sense of like, oh, you made this up, but like a sense of understanding of how these different pieces fit together, right? From like looking at the like matriarchal lineage in your family and this like childhood education piece, and being one of six children, or has 6 siblings. I want to make sure.
Children.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I get that right. And yeah, just sort of how the timing and everything aligned. And of course, being in that co-housing environment, which I definitely also want to talk about today, but like really being in community with different people, multi-generational. You've been through a lot like in the last while. And so first of all, like, thank you for sharing what is, I'm sure, just like a small brief snippet of that journey.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if I can ask, like, when you say you didn't want children and then you changed your mind, how do you understand now? Like, what do you think that shift was for you that made you think, oh yes, that is something I want?
Yeah, it was a really profound moment. I'm a Buddhist meditator. I was on a long silent meditation retreat, and I had always related to, I think, because I've been so immersed in a childful life my whole entire life, I've always known that raising children is a lot of work. Yeah. And I have relatively low energy capacity due to chronic illness, and always have, although I only been diagnosed in the last few years. I didn't always know what that was. And so I always had a pretty strong sense that just keeping up with the energy required to raise especially small children was potentially not very realistic for me. Yeah. And that manifested when I was a younger adult as just thinking I didn't want kids. And then I was on this meditation retreat, and I was actually talking, you know, you kind of break your silence occasionally to have a little one-on-one with the teacher. And I was speaking with her about, I can't even remember exactly, but it was something along the lines of like not having people to pass anything on to, or being sort of a, you know, like not getting to be a parent and a grandparent. I'm very close to my parents and my grandparents who have now passed, but wanting that for myself. And it was like, that was the first time I had really seriously entertained, like, well, what if I do want kids? Like, what would that actually be like? I really hadn't ever allowed myself to fully imagine my way into it. And then on this retreat, I started like really feeling, what would it be like to be like having my own baby and cuddling my own baby and raising this child and being really invested. And suddenly that felt like, oh, whoa, that would be amazing. Of course it would. You know, it was almost like I kind of had known too much about what's hard about it, and I hadn't really oriented to, you know, what's amazing about parenting. And then when I oriented toward what's amazing about parenting, I really wanted it. But I always held also that view that like being realistic, especially in the society that we live in, parenting is very, very hard, you know? And so that was always like the kind of calculation that was happening for both me and my partner along the way.
Yeah. I think it's important to have like I guess we can call it a pragmatic view, or like, or just a really realistic understanding of the fact this is hard work. And then the space in which we are bringing a human into this world or raising a human is like, it's really, really hard. And I know you speak a lot, you know, in your writings about sort of the intersection of social justice issues and reproductive freedoms and like all these different pieces and care and unpaid labor, which is of course so incredibly valuable. I think, and I mention this because my belief and what I see is that a lot of people listening are of that same sort of, like, they understand this is a really big undertaking, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
I think when we consider the gravity of what we are doing or may do or could do, it makes it hard. It's important to approach things this way, I believe, but it makes it really challenging. And to your point, I think it can be hard to like, I guess, sort of separate out or connect with, okay, what is my desire versus the environment in which and circumstances in which I would be doing this, which I think we also need to consider. And so, I mean, to speak to the, you know, chronic illness piece is one example. Of course, there were the pregnancy losses, but like, how did you contend with these, we can call them like external factors to a degree, and the feelings that you had of wanting, like, without that being, I think it's easy to become bitter and to be like, oh, if only, and insert blanks, right? If only I'd had a partner, if only my parents hadn't abused me when I was a child, if only I was more mentally well, if only I wasn't living in this country. How have you been able to sort of balance out those factors with some of the other, perhaps like more emotional sort of feelings that you've had around this decision?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think answering it really honestly, I think that motivation to become embittered, particularly I think for women living in the United States or under conditions where women and parenthood is really, really poorly supported.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to avoid that, you know, and I certainly know a lot of moms who are so angry with the system that they have to function in. And also a lot of involuntarily childless people who are so angry that they had to make that choice, you know, or that the resources weren't available to them to be able to have children in the society that we live in. And somehow, like, anger wasn't my response, you know? And I think it's partly because I was really invested in, and I don't think that this is like a solution in any way. I think it's more like sort of what coincidentally happened for me. So I wouldn't like try to name it as a prescription for anybody else. But I think I was just very oriented toward what it would be like to try to have children with a partner who didn't want to do it. And like how that would be harmful to me to try to push that, you know? And so that was almost like a liberating factor that allowed me to not have to put the blame onto the systems. Although I certainly I went through a big period of a lot of rage at the reproductive health system for women when I was losing pregnancies. I had some really, really awful experiences with healthcare that made me very, very angry. But I think I kind of lucked out that the conditions of my life just sort of allowed me to release that. And the pandemic came along. It was just this time where it was clearly so brutal to be having kids so alone. My sister had a baby during the pandemic by herself in the hospital,
Wow.
It's just and so many people did, and it was just it felt like I had, dodged a harm. And I will say that Auntie-hood has been such a healing resource. And I have heard this from so many readers at the Auntie Bulletin as well, particularly people and especially women who have struggled with involuntary childlessness, that really turning toward being deeply involved in caring for other people's children, that allows some release for some people, not everybody, because it can also be really hard, right, to be around other people's kids when you're really longing to have kids of your own. But for some people, and eventually, it sort of allows some release of this clinging longing that otherwise is there, or maybe not release, but a softening or something like that,
Yeah, I can see that. And that was actually another question I had for you. For you, was there a period where other people's children, it's just funny. I mean, I get that they are other people's children. It's just a weird way we characterize it, because my guess is that in some sense it's it's all of our responsibilities to nurture and nourish these little people, or big people for that matter. Was there a period where for you felt like you had to pull back from some of those relationships, or was it always kind of a solace for you, or a safe space for you to go to?
Yeah, no, I never needed to pull back. I mean, during the pandemic, there was a time where my partner and I were so intensively involved in supporting us. It was essentially just a situation where during the pandemic, there were so many parents who were trying to work full time with no childcare while they had small children. And so we were really intensively involved in helping with that situation. And it was just too much work, So there was some, even for 4 adults, it was too much work,
I can only imagine. Yeah.
But that was more frustration with the situation that we were in than any kind of feeling of pangs of I wish that these children were mine, But I so recognize what that feel, I mean, that's a really common and really, really hard, legitimate feeling, that I think a lot of people really struggle with, and I totally get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So many different thoughts. I want to talk about auntie-hood and being an auntie and what that entails, because I hear a few different things from people. First of all, on what you're sharing, and I don't know if this is the exact word you use, but there's a sense of real intentionality of this is a role that I'm not just not born into, but by someone else being born become, but I'm actually choosing. There's a deliberation there. And I think that probably also speaks to the fact, and in case it's not clear, we're not necessarily talking about our own siblings or in-law siblings, kids. These could be all kinds of kids. So how do you view the role of being an auntie? And especially I'd love to address this for people who are maybe well, I'm an only child, or my siblings have chosen not to have kids, or they live on the other side of the world, or we don't have a good relationship. How can I be an auntie? So maybe you can tell us a bit more about what that actually is and means.
Yay, I love this question. So there's so much opportunity. If you are a person who feels like auntie-hood is not a possibility in your life, allow me to offer you some suggestions. So I like to start by kind of differentiating between the word aunt or aunt and auntie, right? Because an aunt is technically our parent's sibling or the spouse of our parent's sibling. We might not even ever meet that person in our life. True. A lot of us have aunts or aunts who are really involved in our lives, but also maybe not. Whereas an auntie, I think about, and I think others who are thinking about this also really think about aunties as what experts call an alloparent. An alloparent is somebody who is, kind of load bearing and involved in the raising of a child. And throughout human history, there have always been allo parents. Grandparents, especially grandmothers, are like a really, really major category of this throughout human history. We have relied very heavily on grandmothers for childcare and child rearing, but it's also non-familial people, friends of the family, more distant kin, godparents, educators, step parents, foster parents, like any human who is kind of choosing, as we were just speaking about, to step in and support the welfare of a child. And those absolutely don't have to be family. I mean, I have kids in my life who I am related to and kids in my life who I am not related to. And I don't really differentiate between, it's like I'm close to all of them, and it really is a decision, and it's a little bit of a scary and vulnerable decision. It's kind of it can be a hard decision because, or not a hard decision, but a hard thing to execute, right? If you want to be an auntie, you might have to vulnerably go talk to some parents and say, I'd like to be involved in your family's life. I would like to contribute. Yeah. And a lot of times parents will then go like, oh, that's so nice, but they don't actually believe us. This is like they want help usually. But there's like this funny disconnect that I hear about a lot at the Auntie Bulletin, where there are like would-be aunties who would love to be more involved in the lives of kids, but they can't get parents to like take them up on it. And then there are these parents who are just drowning and wishing for support, right? There's actually like in the United States, our previous Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, put out a report a couple of years ago about how parents are overwhelmed. Something like 48% of parents in this huge study reported that they just feel like they're drowning every single day. Yeah. And then we also have this huge loneliness epidemic, right? And there's like a possible two problems looking for two solutions there, right? Like, but it can be hard to match up because we need to have these very vulnerable conversations where we put ourselves out there and we risk being rebuffed. It almost feels like sort of like a romantic, bidding for a commitment. And fortunately, we can kind of slowly work our way toward an alloparental or auntie-like situation. There was a lovely conversation happening in the comments on one of my Auntie Bulletin posts recently about somebody saying that a new family has just moved in down the street and she can tell that they could really use some help. She doesn't know them, but she wants to kind of like reach out to them and say like, hey, I would love to, help you out. Can I pick up your kids after school one day a week? And then there was a nice exchange in the comments among Auntie Bulletin readers talking about like, well, how do we negotiate that little conversation in such a way that it's, it doesn't feel creepy. So especially that's really hard for men to like,
I was thinking of that as well. Yeah.
And sort of slowly establish a trusting relationship where we start to be really involved in the life of a family, and the family has to be open to it, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was going to ask if you have any suggestions, because I do think people are like, I don't know, like people are going to think that's like weird. For all the reasons, rightfully so, in the sense of like parents want to be mindful about who they're welcoming into their kids' lives. But totally. I also think, a lot of people maybe have that assumption, well, you were saying it, but you don't really mean it, or I couldn't do that. And I know I can even think that my mom has like made sort of initiatives to like a couple of friends of mine in Vancouver she's run into saying, hey, if you're ever stuck, like just message me. I'm happy. Like, and not even on a regular basis, but like quite truly, if you need to go run some errands, and like, I know they would never take her up on that. And she is also like, I am genuinely so serious about being able to do that for them. And so like, how would you say we either like open the door to these relationships if it's, let's say, like a friend of ours who has a child or children, or to your point, maybe it's like almost a stranger or like a new neighbor or something. Mm-hmm. Are any suggestions of how that might look like or how we might frame that?
Yeah, totally. Your mom's a great example. I love that you gave us this concrete example to work with. So I think that there are kind of like two sets of people who are kind of our best potential families for aunties. Those are the people who are already in our lives in some way. Like, if you're a grandmother, your kids' friends and their kids. or the people who live really nearby, like super close on your block, right?
Yeah.
Or, in your building or like right there. And in both cases, one of the things that really helps is just offering over and over again, and when you live in close proximity, there's a real advantage there because you can observe need, right? Like there can be a day where the families, the kids are melting down and you can just like kind of lean over the fence and be like, can I help? And there's sort of like these more concrete opportunities might arise. Whereas like for your mom with your friends, like she might not be necessarily seeing them often enough to like be in a situation where she's just going to be able to emergently intervene in a crisis. Right. But like making more concrete offers, I think can be really, really helpful because what we want to do, and I think this is a good move, like there's nothing wrong with this. It's great, is to just say like, anytime I would love to help, like just let me know if I can babysit. And then the parents won't take us up on that typically because they don't know if we mean it.
Yeah.
And it feels like a burden. And we live in a society that really prioritizes individualism and self-reliance. And there's this wonderful writer, Jessica Slice, who's a disabled mom, who talks about how important it is for families to be able to recruit help. And that doesn't mean that we're unfit. The disabled community frequently gets labeled as unfit when they recruit help. But actually, it's like a really, really important strategy. And but it's really, really hard for parents to actually recruit help. So our offering something concrete, I think, can really be helpful, as opposed to saying, I'll babysit anytime, saying, I would love to pick up your kids after school one day a week. Can we talk about what day a week that would be? Or, I would love to take your kids shoe shopping or whatever. I would love to like help you out with some kind of back to school thing. Is there something that I can offer that's like a lot more concrete? And I think the pickup will tend to be more likely, partly because even just making that concrete request telegraphs to parents that we really mean it, and then just sort of being persistent and like recognizing that it's probably going to like take a few times. But once you get that foot in the door and you do it once, then like the next time is easier, So I think it's sort of persistent, be concrete, look for your like emergent opportunities when parents need help. Yeah.
Those are good suggestions. And I would say I can think of like a very similar kind of parallel, which is when somebody is, let's say, going through loss or grief, they often say, rather than saying like, if there's anything you need in terms of how I can support you, let me know, as opposed to like, here's a meal that I cooked. I'm here to like look after your kids. Will you take a nap? Like, like being very like specific. And I guess I might also encourage people to think about as well, like, how do you want to engage and be involved, as far as it should go without saying, but like, don't put something out there if you're like, oh no, now I'm like roped into picking up the kids every Thursday. And I know for myself, like I have a friend in the neighborhood with a 4-year-old, and like about a year ago, I saw these gingerbread kits. I mean, you used to bake the gingerbread, now you can just buy a kit, but it just brought back this thought or memory of like, oh, I used to love making gingerbread houses. And so I just sent her a quick message saying like, oh, I just saw these kits at the local store. Like, I'd love to do this with your daughter. And she was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, that'd be awesome. And so we had this afternoon before Christmas where the two of us sat down, and like, it wasn't an ongoing commitment thing, but for me, it was sort of that bid to like, make that connection for me to like nourish my inner child. And, I think even as a starting point, some of those like little kind of initiatives can go a long way, because it shows that you're like, yeah, you're serious about this, and it is an experience that you want to offer or have or share or whatever. So
totally.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. If you are listening to this and you are a woman on the fence about kids, you're going to want to keep listening, pay close attention, because we are gearing up to kick off our Kids Are Child-Free group program. This is a 3-month group program, and we are starting the next session on the 24th of September. So if you are on the fence, if you are wanting some guidance, not just for a 2-hour workshop, but over a longer period of time to help you sort through all of the different aspects of this decision that are keeping you stuck, if you want to be in the company of like-minded women who get what it's like not to know whether kids or child-free is the path for you, and you would like my guidance helping you do so, you can check out the Kids Are Child Free group program, I will include the link with details in the show notes of today's episode, and you can also find that under the Work With Me tab at kidsorechildfree.com. I'm interested, what do you think the role is, or the importance of the role of auntie, or even call it any other alloparent in kids' lives? Because the way I see it, and I mean, I just want to, something I wanted to mention earlier in the conversation, you are in the US, which you've mentioned. We've got a pretty international audience of people, and the way in which we live and engage and interact with kids. I mean, I would say you're probably in a pretty unique situation in the US living in co-housing, whereas my understanding, if it's anything like Canada, is people tend to sort of live in their little silos, if you will, as far as we've got our immediate family members, we've maybe got some friends or family that help out, but I don't think I know we're not as connected as we could be. Do you think it's important for kids to grow up with the support and help of other people who aren't their actual parents? And if so, why?
Heck yeah. I mean, I think there are so many advantages to having aunties. And I actually wrote about this at the Auntie Bulletin recently. There was a post called The 7 Blessings of the Aunties. And I
love that
crowdsourced. Oh, you read it. I'm so glad.
I did.
Yeah, I crowdsourced, which I do, every couple of months, I survey all the readers of the Auntie Bulletin, and they tell me about their lives, and then I publish what they have to say about it. So it was this lovely post where we heard from a lot of aunties around the world about, what they contribute to families, and also from a lot of parents talking about, what the blessings of the aunties are in their lives. And one of the big ones that always comes to my mind is just communicating to children that people live in different ways, because especially living in these pretty isolated nuclear families, kids get very set in their ways, and they think that, the way that their parents make a grilled cheese sandwich is the only way to make a grilled cheese sandwich, and they think the way that their family does things is the only way to do things. And that leads to suffering. It leads to difficulty when the kid starts to get out into the world and try to navigate the world, if they have these sort of rigid expectations about how things are meant to be. So the more adults are in a kid's life, the more flexible they are. It's just almost it naturally follows that they're just used to some houses are messy and some houses are tidy, and in some places we have these kinds of rules, and in other places we have these kinds of rules, and some people make grilled cheese sandwiches this way and some people make grilled cheese sandwiches that way. And it also can extend to more sort of profound and impactful things, in some cases, if a kid is living in a household where that's not, friendly to their gender identity or something like that, they might find a real refuge with aunties. And in fact, that has been happening throughout human history, and certainly is a major contribution of the queer community to young people is providing refuge for young queer kids, and actually not, queer allies as well provide that kind of refuge. And so that exposure to difference and exposure to different values, I think, is incredibly important. I think there's also just the, opportunity to get out into the world and do different activities that you wouldn't do, for kids. I think it's such a resource. And also, I remember this from the post that was recently, a woman wrote about how her own auntie, when she was growing up, is a repository of memories about her mother now that her mother has died. And that lifelong connection allows her to stay connected to her own family. And I thought that was really profound, that, it isn't just about the child's childhood, but it's about our whole lives having more family, more kin, more people who are there for us, even when we lose our closest family members. It's a real resilience and protective factor for our well-being throughout our whole lives.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. And, it's interesting, even I lost my dad 7 years ago. And although it's my mom's brother, not his brother, but I remember feeling I want to have more sort of intentionality in the relationship that I have with my one uncle, because I feel not to say I view him as a father figure, but it feels even more important to have these sort of anchors within my family, and maybe to have that male presence or energy. And I think, the line of questioning was around the benefit to kids and families. And I think it's also for ourselves, thinking about, and maybe this piggybacks nicely on you mentioning through the meditation retreat, how you had this realization of like that point of connection through different like generations, and even being like a conduit, maybe for my words, not yours, but for like certain knowledge. Or I hear about people like the fear of losing traditions, for example, not being able to carry things forth. And in a way that, like, I know a lot of times, and this also is, it's not a bad idea, but like very much driven by like patriarchy, is like legacy, but like more in terms of like these really meaningful experiences that we want to share or cherish, that doesn't only have to be done with our own children. And I wonder if there's like a lovely opportunity there. And this is something, so since my husband and I in the last several years have decided not to have kids, we've asked ourselves, how do we want to be involved with kids in our lives? Like, to what extent and in which ways? And I think I want to be mindful. I mean, this is a conversation about being involved in kids' lives. So I'm imagining the people listening like have a certain level of interest, but the ways in which we do that is going to be unique for all of us, where some people, maybe it's more like being a mentor to older children. And for some, it's maybe more about actually how we can relieve and support the parents versus the kids themselves. But I guess for us, looking at, okay, some of our values are like having unique experiences and travel, and like not wanting to share with kids in our lives more stuff, but can we offer them something they may not otherwise have? And so we're in a position where we've decided to do some trips with the kids as they get like older, like into their teens, which is, it's just a new thing we've started, but like, it's really cool to see us not just share that love with them, something that we value, that we hope to instill in them, like go out and see the world. But some of the little things that are coming from it that I had to think about when you shared about like the grilled cheese example. Our niece, who's 16, we took her on a trip for her 16th birthday. And something she reflected to Chris and I after is like, wow, the two of you are so open with everyone. You're always talking to people. There's always this conversation with people. It's sort of this way of moving about the world that maybe she doesn't see to the same extent in her own family, or, you know, with her parents. And I just like that, I think, is a great example of something like how other people can operate. Or, you know, we're looking for the vegetarian and vegan restaurants. And again, sharing that openness of like, hey, you're going to try something different with us because this is how we eat. I feel like it's so valuable for everybody.
Totally. And especially with kids who are growing up these days, and, you know, they went through the pandemic and their lives have kind of shrunk and they're like really online. Having experiences where they get out into the world in a way that's different than what they're used to, it's really, really helpful for them in preparing them to leave their parents' home and like be able to survive with other experiences besides what they're used to, and like, you know, greet that with curiosity rather than like fear.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I just think, you know, I would encourage people who are on the fence, if there's something you feel about, like, if you're leaning child free, but there's a real fear about those things that you'll lose through not passing things along or not being able to have certain experiences with kids in your life. Like, and this actually is something else I want to ask you about, but it's weird how I feel like sort of in our culture, there's this idea that if it's not our kid, it somehow like is an experience that doesn't count. And I'll give you like a funny little illustration, but like, I can remember having this beautiful moment. I've shared this with many clients and probably listeners, of like dancing with my nephew. He was about 8 months old. And we were dancing to Bob Marley, which is what my late father used to love listening to. And he's just like that chunky, beautiful age. And I'm like thinking, this is so precious. This is so beautiful. This is so meaningful. This is not my child. And then I stopped myself and I thought, but you get this experience. You're having it. This is your nephew. And whether he was my nephew or if he was like, you know, my surrogate nephew through, like, it was beside the point. But it was just interesting how, and I see this from so many people, it's like, oh, like I love this about kids or that. And I don't get that. I don't get to have that. If I choose not to have be a parent, I'm missing that. And it's like, why do you think we sort of like negate or at least demote experiences with kids that are not our own? And this sort of, and maybe it's just me who's noticed this, but perhaps you can relate of like, it doesn't count in the same way.
Yeah. Well, you know, my initial, like the first thing I want to say is just capitalism. You know, we're like deeply conditioned to individualism and ownership, you know, and the wonderful writer James Baldwin said, all of the children are ours, you know, and I think about that a lot. I think about that all the time, you know, and particularly I come from a family where kids were adopted. There are foster children in my family. Through multiple generations. And that kind of loosens our thinking around who's our child, right? It's like being in adoptive and foster spaces allows us to think more expansively about like who is ours, and do I need to be biologically related to somebody for them to be mine, to be part of my family, and for me to be theirs. And I think that is a real gift, to be able to think expansively about who is ours, and actually, rather than having to sort of like have a narrative of this person is not mine, this child is not mine, this family is not my family, and how do I then legitimize my relationship to them? I think I would actually encourage like, this child is mine.
Yeah.
This family is my family, you know, and in a different way, you know, our auntie kind of ownership over a child is very different than what a parent is doing, right? And we need to really honor the difference between what aunties do and what parents do, right? And not sort of devalue what parents are doing because what parents are doing is, you know, heroic. Yeah. And at the same time, like, kind of, I think it's really helpful to sort of question that, you know, I think it comes, like I said, like, it's really this conditioning around individualism and separateness and nuclear families that are not the way that humans evolved to live. The nuclear family is a really new kind of 20th century invention. Yeah. And, you know, through most of our human history, our definition of mine was much more expansive, you know? Yeah. And who could come into my family was much more expansive. And so I think that really helps, is just kind of like legitimizing that relationship as like it's real and it matters.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just think, you know, if you're having that experience, if you're having those emotions or those connections, like, you're having them, they're yours. Like, and I mean, again, it's not necessarily the emphasis on ownership from a standpoint of like you say, that sort of capitalist perspective, but it's like, if I'm having this beautiful moment, I'm having this beautiful moment. Can I be present with it? Can I be in it, as opposed to always having to have that like compare and contrast of like, well, I didn't birth this child. Like, to your point, there's many ways for someone to be one's child or to be part of the fabric of one's life. So, speaking of ways in which people have like historically lived versus how people are living today, I mean, you mentioned you're in a co-housing situation. And so I'm curious if you can share a little bit about that, how that choice came about, and I guess sort of what that represents in your life, broadly speaking, because I do think there's a model there, even if it's not followed to a T, that can be a special sort of solace for all people, not just people who choose to be child-free, but like as we move into especially the later years of our life. So I'm curious, like, kind of your involvement on that front.
Oh, yeah. Well, I would say that living in co-housing has been really transformational for me, and something that I was interested in for a long time. The people that we live with are longtime friends. Mm-hmm. And so this friend and I had been talking for years about, in a sort of like hypothetical way, about the possibility of co-housing. She's a city planner and an architect, and had spent a lot of time in Denmark, where there's, you know, the infrastructure is built to encourage co-housing. There's lots and lots of co-housing available for people who live in Denmark. And so we've been talking about that for years, and my partner and I were living in a rental, and the rental was going to be torn down to make way for some new development that our city really needs. And so we were being displaced. We needed to move. And so these friends of ours had been planning to build a backyard cottage, and we were thinking about moving into that cottage. And we were also at that time just kind of turning toward this idea of potentially having children. So we needed to move. We went over to our friend's house to kind of look at like the site and think about the cottage. And we were really feeling like, you know what, I think this is going to be too small to have a kid. It doesn't feel like there's quite enough privacy. And then my partner went, you know, the house next door is for sale. And it was just incredible luck, because the
no kidding.
housing market at that time was like blowing up. But this particular house, a number of sales had fallen through because the seller had like not done her due diligence on the permits. You know, it was just this like very specific situation where we ended up being able to buy the house next door, which is a real incredibly lucky, fortuitous thing that happened. And also,
absolutely.
A function of privilege as well, because, we've got some access to wealth through our families that otherwise would not have allowed us to buy a house at that time, specifically my partner's family. So we were able to move in next door. They also have a basement apartment. So they've got renters who live downstairs who are also part of the co-housing. So we have, 3 households in our co-housing community. And it's just so great. We have merged our backyards. So we have this big urban backyard, and we eat meals together 4 nights a week. We take turns cooking for one another. There's, do a regular stints of childcare, and the kids are in and out of our house on a pretty regular basis, which is really, really delightful. And I'm an introvert. At our previous house, we never hosted anybody, and now we just have people over a lot, kind of almost more than I can handle, both within our co-housing community, but it also has just sort of I've become adept at cooking for large groups of people, and I'm not afraid to do it, So there's just kind of these skills that have developed out of co-housing that, it just feels like so much less of a lift to just have people over. We've got, a big picnic table, a big backyard. So co-housing is not, certainly in the United States, not the infrastructural or policy default in any way. And it really requires a lot of luck and resources to be able to make it happen. And I think that we really need to be, to the best of our ability, when opportunities arise, seizing them. I feel like move heaven and earth to make co-housing happen is one of my big, things that I want to emphasize. It is worth it. It's worth it changing your life plans to make it happen.
Yeah.
It's worth deciding, instead of the way that I envisioned home ownership happening, we're going to do this other thing. It's worth a lot. Because it really disrupts the nuclear family and isolation kind of structure that we are conditioned to, and also pushed into by the containers of capitalism, particularly in the United States, but in lots of places. And it's just so joyful. It's just so wonderful, and so it just feels like this daily injection of meaning and connection that's very hard for people to access in our society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet is everything, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like what you said about it's worth disrupting plans for, because I do agree. I'm guessing, as much as it sounds like a really cool situation, it probably has not been without its hurdles in terms of how do we navigate living. I mean, even just figuring out how to live with a partner, let alone if you have your own children, let alone other people's partners and families and kids.
Yep.
But the payoff sounds like it's immense. And I wish I could remember who it was. It was actually an Instagram reel I'd seen. I remember it was a guy, it was in my feed a couple of weeks ago, but he was talking about him and I think his best friend who he grew up with, or there was the 2 of them, and then I think their kids. And he said what you said, to the extent of it's not necessarily the neighborhood or the city we'd want to be in, or quite even the kind of home, but we've made those sort of amends because it's given us so much more. And this was so important for us to do. And I think, it's like anything in life. We like to believe we can have it all the time. And it's we've got to have trade-offs oftentimes, and really focus on prioritizing what's of most value. So it sounds
absolutely. Yeah. I think the compromise, the house that we bought is not the house that I would have picked on an aesthetic level, but it doesn't matter.
It's all wood. It looks very cool. By the way, it looks like you're
my
living
parents' house.
Oh, okay. I'm it looks like you're in Denmark more than than Seattle.
I happen to be visiting my parents right now. So there's a lot of things that we've compromised on to make it happen, and it's just worth it. Yeah. I would compromise on much more,
Yeah. Well, and again, I know this isn't maybe having our grand vision of, hey, it would be really cool to do this in the future. Maybe it's not something available for people right now, but I think it's so important to see examples like yours, to see what may be within reach. And even, this is a really silly little example, but I bought a cabbage a couple of days ago. I don't know if you cook with cabbage of any kind, red cabbage in this case.
Love cabbage.
You're feeding big families, but a cabbage goes a long way. It's the vegetable that keeps on giving. And my husband said, I want you to give half this cabbage to Lisa and Toby, our friends who live half a block away. We've got other friends who they were away, we're watering plants. We've got quite a nice community in the neighborhood. And I think for encouraging people, again, I know this isn't for everyone, depending where they live, those relationships, but there are ways we can still partake in sharing and caring and coming together that don't have to mean living in the same house or next door to each other, but like just even this idea of like, I think there are, for example, apps and stuff that have been set up like this now. But I remember several years ago, my husband's like, why not, instead of us deciding to get a, like, I don't know, power washer or whatever it was we need like once a year, that, and I think these exist now. And of course there's some neighborhoods and communities have like an online forum or Facebook page, but to the sharing economy, right? And
Yep.
But to be able to do that in so many other different ways, it just requires us to think differently than the way we've always been prescribed to think.
It really does. Right. Well, and we have a neighborhood WhatsApp group that's probably 20, 30 families, households on this WhatsApp group. And it's such a great place to borrow a power washer, or like if we recently, it's been plum season and pear season. People who have got fruit trees just have this massive surplus of fruit and they can give a lot away. We didn't have that. We just started this WhatsApp group this year and we didn't have it last year. And now a lot of sharing is happening through this WhatsApp group that didn't exist before. And a lot of that grew up around actually our local neighborhood school. I've just written about public schools at the Auntie Bulletin. And, schools are such a hub for parents getting to know each other and then introducing their friends to each other. And so, even if you can't live in co-housing, like starting a neighborhood WhatsApp group can really like replicate some of that, some of the benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like what you say about like public schools being a hub for sort of activity and connection and community. And I do think that is, okay, maybe not the public schools per se, but the idea of having kids is one reason why I see people like perhaps clinging more to this decision outcome than they would otherwise, because the idea is if I'm child free, I'm losing this sort of built-in network of like parents who become friends in the neighborhood and the kids who are friends. And like, I guess I want to say it's like one more reason that sort of speaks for being an auntie and being involved, and that we don't have to live on the outside just because we don't have kids. And yet I feel like that's the perception.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you circled back to that because I feel like I'm in a phase right now of kind of like negotiating for myself emotionally my relationship to like the neighborhood moms who are like this tight crew of, and the kids in my life are like later elementary school. And so those families have known each other for several years and I'm doing after school pickup one day a week. And so I've met a lot of the parents, especially moms of the kids in my life's friends and just the kids that they go to school with and people around the neighborhood. But I do feel some sense of like a little bit impostery, right? So when I run into some of those like moms at the local farmers market and they're like hanging out kind of like talking about their, the nightmare that is summer camp scheduling, I want to participate in the conversation. Maybe I don't have that much to say about summer camp scheduling specifically, but I like them. And I just sort of want to say hi. And I think there's just kind of this, I think they like me too. Right. And there's just this sort of like awkward navigating of like, can we make this relationship work? Can these moms be talking about mom stuff and also incorporate this like neighborhood lady who we know is really involved, knows our kids? And the answer is yes. And it's just a little awkward, but it's kind of fine, And I think that, for me is like a really good way that I'm like strengthening my courage muscles around community building is to just like not buy into the story that I'm an imposter when I'm having conversations with moms. About sort of mom related stuff and school. And the school is a lot of times, like this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, get back to school for so many places can be kind of hard on involuntarily childless people. There's all these like beautiful back to school photographs and back to school nights. And we might feel like, oh, geez, I'm really missing out, And I think exploring just like, well, can I go to the back to school night and like, what does that feel like? Like, I think there's just a lot of room for exploration there, and my experience is that the parents want aunties so badly, and they are so jealous of families that have aunties, like they want us to be around and they want us to know their kids, So I think we just all need to cultivate courage there.
Yeah. Yeah. And to just like let it be awkward sometimes,
Yeah,
as you say.
yeah.
And it's the same with having those initial conversations with people where you want to like foster involvement with their kids, or whether it's getting into a co-housing sort of scenario. Like
Yeah.
we have to be willing to risk some or experience some discomfort in order
Yeah.
to get those experiences that we want to have. So thank you for
It's
being
worth it.
a shining beacon, an example of that. So
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Lisa, where can we find the Auntie Bulletin or Auntie Bulletin? And I'm curious, do you think this is, how do you say it? Auntie or Auntie?
I say Auntie Bulletin, but I am called Auntie Lisa. From the beginning, I've been saying Auntie Bulletin just because Auntie Bulletin sounds like it's like maybe a newsletter about things that I hate, or there's just so many ways.
Gotcha.
So anyway,
I
have
that kind of auntie. I'm like thinking little ants.
A-N-T-I. Yeah,
Auntie,
there's A-N-T-I, there's A-N-T-Y, little ants. There's also like, could be a poker newsletter, A-N-T-E. So for disambiguation, Auntie. I say Auntie.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if it was like an American English versus British versus
Canadian
what I think it's
English. Like in the United States, like a West Coast, East Coast thing, maybe. I don't even know. Yeah. Both are correct.
Message Lisa or I and tell us if you say Auntie or Auntie.
Yeah, totally. Let us know. As a professional auntie, even I don't know. Yeah. So Auntie Bulletin, I'm on Substack, and it's the auntie.substack.com. I would love if you would come read my newsletter and subscribe to it. There's so many, it's a really great reader community, lots and lots of other aunties that you can meet. And I feel like Auntiehood can sometimes be a little isolating. We don't necessarily know other people like ourselves. So it's really nice to find community, and the Auntie Bulletin's a great place to do that.
Amazing. Yeah, you seem like you have an incredible, strong community. And like I say, it's a wonderful resource as well. There was one recently, I think, about like fun things to do with kids and kind of keep them engaged and entertained. I was like, oh, this looks good. So we will be sure to link to that in the show notes. Is there anything else going on? Any projects we can point people to?
I'm like going on some podcasts and things like that, but I'm mostly focusing on the newsletter right now. So I'd love if people would come check it out.
Okay. That's the place to be, the place to check it out. Definitely go give it a read, give it a subscribe. Thank you, Lisa. Fabulous
Thank you
auntie,
so much for having me.
For coming on.
Yeah. So great to meet you.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of the Kids or Childfree podcast. Now, before you leave, I want to ask you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, because lo and behold, we have a YouTube channel. I've failed to tell most of you that this even exists. Now, you can not only find all episodes of the podcast on our YouTube channel, but you can also find short form videos. We've got them categorized based on the types of conversations I'm having, whether they're with parents, whether they're about being child free. We've got different tips on how you can navigate this kids or child free decision. So lots of good stuff there. Go check it out. Our YouTube channel is Kids or Child Free. I will have it linked in the show notes of today's episode, so you've got that handy. Otherwise, you can give it a search. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes or videos that we share on there. All right, that is all from me. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.